الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So continuing from last week we looked at the main rituals, prayer rituals, etc., Hajj rituals, fasting rituals in the Quran, and we spoke about a number of key concepts. Today we're looking at trade, and we're looking at the main verses. There are many verses in the Quran that relate to trade directly and indirectly, and there are many hadith. So here we're going to see um, there's some key discussions that are not found in the Quran, um, at least not explicitly anyway. So inshallah we'll look at some of the main points here. So general principle in the Quran, Allah has permitted trade, al-bay', right? So therefore the default of every financial transaction is that it is halal. That is where it starts. And then we start cutting that off, saying, well, this is haram for this reason, this is haram for this reason. But the default of every financial transaction is that it is halal. That's the default assumption. Um, and Allah has forbidden usury, right? So what is the concept of usury? Is renting, like paying for the usufruct of cash. That's what it is, right? That's basically what it is. So it makes no sense to some people, because if you can rent out a car that is worth $10,000, then you can rent out money that is worth $10,000. What's the difference? Right? The difference is Allah has made trade, financial transactions in general permissible, but He has forbidden usury. You can't do that. And so any financial transaction that results in a debt and that debt increases or decreases, if it's paid early, for example, if you pay early, it will decrease. If you pay later, it will increase, etc. Then this is going to, so debt factoring, etc., and these kind of things, these are all forbidden. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not consume one another's wealth in falsehood. I think the apostrophe is in the wrong place here. Um, what does that mean? That applies to selling something for nothing, um, such as, for example, cryptocurrency, right? And in principle, fiat currency. So fiat currency is fundamentally problematic, right? Fundamentally because it's fiat, because it's made up. Fiat in Latin means let it be, right? Like the king, the ruler, the government just created a currency. It is not that has no innate value, right? Its value is a creation. It's a lie that everybody believes. So fiat currency itself is problematic, let alone cryptocurrency, right? And so the whole issue that around fiat currency and cryptocurrency is, what is the definition of wealth? What is the definition of wealth? Um, and so we see there's some things that are obvious, right? When you say mal, for example, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a drought, and they go to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, our mal have died, meaning our cattle, right? Our cattle. The word khair, right, means wealth as well in the Quran. Khair, meaning money, because it's good, there's benefit in it, something that has use, right? So something that has innate use or innate benefit. And we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enshrined gold and silver as innately valuable, even if it's not, right? That's why you can't use gold and silver tools, because it's kind of like somebody, it's like somebody smalling, somebody, using money for toilet paper, right? It's like, what are you doing? That's extreme decadence. So like gold and silver, by default, you can't use them as tools. You can't use them as cups and spoons, etc. Because this money, you're using money, using something that is currency. Um, and so you can't do that. And so basically, it's supposed to be a currency, or the Islamic currency, which is gold and silver, or it's supposed to be a commodity. That's wealth. The issue then is with fiat currency and then with cryptocurrency. So with fiat currency, there's a problem. What it's nothing. It's not a thing. It's not actually worth anything. The only difference between a dollar and monopoly money is that people accept it. That's all. So is that sufficient? And to what extent do they have to accept it? So, 99% of the scholars today, they say, of course, fiat currency is currency. Fiat currency is wealth. If you have dollars, you're going to pay zakat. If you have dollars, there's a riba that will play the dollars. Of course. What else are you going to look? How else are you going to deal with it? Right? Um, but it is problematic. Right? It is problematic. Um, and then that is one very, very weak argument, to say that there's no such thing as interest because there's no money. Right? So if I'm playing Monopoly with somebody, I can lend him an interest in Monopoly. It's fine because that's not money. Like I can give you $500 of Monopoly money and you give me back six. That's fine. That's halal. I can do that because it's not money. It's just a game. So it's totally fine. And so if we say that fiat currency, dollars, pounds, yen, isn't a nothing, then A, there's no zakat on it. B, there's no riba that applies to it. And C, it is haram to trade in because you're just giving somebody does a service for you and you send them a number. It means nothing. You've a number on a database has changed. That's all. You send them money. What's that? That's not a thing. That has no innate value. It's not crude oil, it's not bread, it's not metal, it's not a use, for example. You didn't say, for example, I'll teach you something, I'll fix your car or something. It has no value. Right? But again, that's a very, very fringe opinion. Somebody who give fatwa on that, we would be very concerned about that. It's a very fringe opinion, but that doesn't make it illogical, right? There's a genuine Islamic problem and financial problem and economic, environmental problem with money that can be created out of nothing, right? Money that can be created out of nothing, right? There's a fundamental problem there, harm to the world when you can create money out of nothing, right? It's a problem. And this also includes like things that are pointless. So there are certain things that are genuinely worthless, and there's certain things that you might, as a customer, value. But the Sharia doesn't allow you to do that. So, for example, I want to buy, the sweat that was collected from a handkerchief of Elvis Presley. So the Sharia won't allow you to buy that because it's not considered significant enough, right? I want to buy a lion to put outside my house, and just to show that don't mess with me. I'm a wealthy man and I have a lion that people look at and they go, wow, that guy's amazing. So that's considered stupid and pointless and ridiculous decadence. That has no use. You find a value in it, and people might find a value, but that's because there's an odd facet, because there's a corrupt system. That's not a real thing. So you can't sell things not real, right? In the past, for example, they mentioned, even now, right? I'll pay you to slap yourself. You can't, even if you slap yourself, you can't get the money's not yours. You cannot hire somebody to slap themselves. Or I want you to stand there for 1 millionth of a second. Stand still for 1 millisecond, I'll give you $1 million. You can't do that because that's consuming wealth for nothing. You got to pay somebody to do something. Pay somebody to do something. All right, they did a service. They said there's some use in it. There's something you can benefit from it. It doesn't have to be extremely religious, right? So this concludes, for example, I bought, I want to buy a new Ferrari. Well, you bought one yesterday. I know, but I want another one. That's okay. That is, at least in principle, there is value in that car. In principle, there's value in it, right? But there's a point where the Sharia will actually put a line and say that's just invalid. It's an invalid sale because you bought something for nothing. You can't buy something for nothing. You're not allowed to do that. And so when you come to cryptocurrency, okay, fiat currency, more by accident than by design, we all accept it. But with cryptocurrency, it needs to be as well accepted. It must have that currency. It must flow in the world the way that the yen does, the way that the dollar does, the euro, etc. Right? And so here it's borderline. The Bitcoin, for example, is borderline. Do you actually pay tax on Bitcoin, or do you only pay tax on Bitcoin when you cash it in? Ethereum, Doge, any of the other things, etc. These things are very, very much borderline, and the best thing to do is to avoid it. Right? The best thing to do is avoid it and to invest your money in real things. And there are certain types of things that you could label as tech as a cryptocurrency or something like that, but they're actually asset based. Right? You're talking about actual assets. Like you are, it's not even a currency. It's not a fiat currency at all. In reality, it's a share of something, right? And so there are certain things that are, it's not, so there's games that you play and everybody agrees on the game, a lie that everybody agrees, and versus um genuine investment into something, right? Shares, etc. Right? You own technology, you own a share of a company or whatever it is, something else. And then general principle in Islamic finance, you cannot hire somebody to do something haram. You can't buy something that only has a haram use, and you can't be hired to do something haram for somebody, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, cooperate with one another in goodness and righteousness, and do not cooperate in sin and transgression. You can't do that, right? So I'm hired as a hitman. He was happy for me to kill the guy. I was happy to receive the money. That's haram. Can't do that. So what happens now? He gave me $5,000, $50,000 to kill this person. What do? I go back to the mafia boss and give his money back. It's not my money. Yeah, but he was happy to give it to you, right? So the concept in civil law is al-aqd shari'at al-muta'aqidain. The contract is the sacred is goes back to the agreement of the two contractors. I'm happy, you're happy. What's wrong? Like what's wrong? I want to buy the whiskey, you want to sell it to me. What's wrong? Why can't there be a contract? Because Allah doesn't allow you to cooperate in sin. You can't do that. Just not your money. When you hire somebody to do something that is sin, right? But then you can say, well, what about selling guns? Okay, what about selling clothes? Could people use clothes in a sinful way? Could people use guns in a sinful way? Could people use, um, I don't know. So we're going to say there's a big difference between directly assisting in sin, right? Directly assisting in sin and indirectly assisting in sin. It's not the same thing. So you developed software that could be used for this and could be used for this. You sold a knife which could be used for the halal or the haram. You sold butter that could be used in a ham sandwich, could be in a cheese sandwich. Why not? You sold bread. You sold I don't know what. So there's many things where I'm not responsible for your use of it, right? As long as I don't know exactly how you're going to use it, right? And the scholars, they in reality, when it comes down to the specifics of to what extent is direct, involvement, they debate, right? So, things like DoorDash, for example, right? So I went to the store and I picked up this food from McDonald's and I dropped it at your house, right? Uh, Even I presume you're in Canada. They have DoorDash in Canada. Don't know if it's a world thing yet, but these various apps that drop off food at your house or I don't know what kind of things they have um so uh you're involved in delivering haram food to someone's house. So I mean, if you live in California like I do, I mean it's not not impossible that the hamburgers for their dog, right? And so the argument of some scholars is no, like I didn't put the food in your I didn't put the food in your mouth. Right? I didn't put the alcohol in your mouth, right? And so, so on one very extreme level is the scenario where I work at a till, right? I'm there as I'm there at the till, and I'm employed by a kafir who is selling to a kafir. So here is this non-Muslim, and he's paying me to to work as a cashier. And so I put the alcohol went through, and it was a Christian selling to a Christian. So, well, in a Muslim state, let alone a non-Muslim country, in a Muslim state, can a Christian make alcohol and sell it to another Christian? So, yeah. Okay, then how am I involved in sin then? If I was just in the between, like, so according to some scholars, this is not, you're not cooperating in sin because it's halal for them to begin with, right? So a kafir sells haram food to another kafir. It's like, okay. But what if it was a Muslim, right? What if the owner of the company was a Muslim, right? Here's a liquor store owned by Muslims, right? Now you're helping them do the sin. What if you're selling to Muslims, right? So majority of scholars are saying you can't do those things. You cannot be involved in delivering alcohol. You cannot be involved in delivering pork. You can't be in any of these things. You can't do that, right? It's not, you can't do it. Forget it. Minority, um, in certain scenarios where you're just the man in between two non-Muslims, right? You're not really helping them do sin per se. Same kind of thing. You ordered a coffee during Ramadan. I mean, do you have to drink it now? So is it haram to sell coffee? Here's a cup of coffee. Is it haram to sell a cup of coffee during Ramadan? Maybe you're buying it for your wife. Maybe so. This lady comes and you're like, oh, I can't sell it to her. Well, how do you know she's not? She's not. Might not be fasting. Maybe he's not fasting, right? So majority of scholars say this is haram. You can't do that. You can't do something that would normally that outwardly looks like a sin, right? You're helping to facilitate the sin, so you can't do that. And minority scholars will say no, it's not like that. So the question is, to what extent am I actually complicit in this sin, right? And as the phrase goes, the devil's in the details. But that's true, the devil's in the details when it comes to the mufti, right? But for the person, we always try and avoid as much as possible, right? You're doing software for um, an organization. What is that organization? Oh, they're not very ethical. I try and avoid it. Okay, well, I don't have another job. And what I'm doing is not technically facilitating sin. Okay, but it's better to avoid things as much as possible. So we have to, we'll just discuss at the end, inshallah, kind of a system of how, uh, uh, when the going gets tough, how far do you go, right? So anyway, there's some gray lines here. Inshallah, I'll share some articles on the group, inshallah, about that. In general, forbidden for you are carrion. So you cannot, it's forbidden, carrion, dead, non-halal food. Therefore, you cannot buy or sell non-halal food. You cannot buy and sell blood, and by extension, any filth. You can't not buy and sell urine. So can you donate blood? You can donate blood if there's for a central thing. Someone just wants to look at blood. You can't just give them your blood. But somebody needs a blood, transfusion. Okay, and you are the person. Okay, but you can't sell blood. You can't sell swine, and you can't sell anything that is filthy, urine, etc. Any of these things. Alcohol, you can't sell these things. So here, when you say intoxicants are filth, you can't, they're forbidden, meaning you can't sell them because they're filthy, right? Okay, what about idols? Could you sell an idol? You say, yes, you could sell an idol if it has a halal use. Okay, what is the halal use of an idol? Nothing. So you cannot sell something that doesn't have any halal use, right? So let's say, for example, non-pharmaceutical grade marijuana, right? I don't know how it works in the marijuana now in California. Marijuana is legal, right? So you could legally buy and sell it. But if you're selling it to somebody who will use it in the sinful way, then it's sinful. But does marijuana have halal use? It does have halal use. Growing it can be done for halal reasons. It has a halal use. So so if there's a company that sells it to another company, and this company then uses it in a halal way and a haram way, sells it in this way and sells it in that way, then it has a halal use, as opposed to something that has no halal use, right? Like, what is the halal use of this thing? It has no halal use, in which case that's haram, right? So people ask the question, oh, can I sell women's clothing? Because it could be used in a haram way. Yeah, but it does have a halal use. It doesn't have to be used in a haram way, does it? Similarly, there was a doctor he was asking this question. He said, I'm a doctor, and currently all my patients basically are active homosexuals who are recovering from HIV, and I'm helping them recover. Like, am I involved in sin? Because basically, I'm getting them back on their feet again, and so they can go back to their sins. So the answer is, you're not directly involved in doing that. Maybe the person has just come to you. He just took a shahada yesterday. He's made tawbah and he's become Muslim, and now he's recovering from HIV, and you're helping him, and you're getting him back on his feet again in the halal way. So what you're doing is not directly instrumental to sin, right? There is a halal use in there's something halal in what you're doing, right? As opposed to something that has no halal use, an idol, I don't know what else, um, a guitar has no halal use, right? According to majority scholars, etc. Right? Um, so something that has no halal use, you cannot sell it. Something that has a halal and a haram use, you can sell it, but you can't sell it to somebody who you know will use it in a sinful way. And one of these things as well, and it's somewhat of an issue of debate, but it is important, is that Allah will never grant the disbelievers a way over the disbelievers a way or an authority over the believers, right? And so this is a concept, and it applies to buying and selling slaves. So one of the key things that we as humans and Muslims have to do is to be frank with ourselves, right? To know about history and be frank with ourselves. So we look at the slave trade, right? The slave trade, part of the slave trade was Muslims, right? Muslims, through jihad, enslaved people, right, in the west coast of Africa and sold them to non-Muslims. And that's fiqh-wise is a problem, right? When these slaves were Muslims, that's a huge problem because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given a way and authority for disbelievers over believers. You can't, for example, that's why is it that a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim man because he cannot have authority over her. Why is it that if she becomes Muslim, her father cannot marry her off because he doesn't have authority? So you cannot be a slave owner of a Muslim. It's not possible. You can't like right, you can't. So what happened in the Americas is part and parcel of Muslims not applying their religion. They should have never have sold. Um, they should never have sold um, slaves to the non-Muslims for multiple reasons. Because they know how they were being treated, because many of them were Muslims. Because so according to the Hanbalis, even if they were not Muslims, but the fact that they are part of your what's it called? Like in the Bible and the Quran, when you talk about a slave, it's like part of your tribe. It's like your family. So you can't sell it to a non-Muslim. You can't do that. You can't give that authority over them. Somebody that used to be part of your tribe, part of your family, is now part of their family. You can't do that, right? And so this is an important concept. Um, thing to understand is like Muslims have to realize where they did mistakes in the past, and we shouldn't do it again. And understand that there is this izzah of Islam, there's this might and dignity of Islam that we don't put a, we shouldn't we're not supposed to be under non-Muslims, right? We're not supposed to be under non-Muslim rule, right? That's not a thing that Muslims in principle do. And there's ayat ad-dain, which is a useful um, verse to look at because which is very long, and we just can read some sections from it. Which is, "O believers, when you contract a loan for a fixed period of time, commit it to writing." So this is very important, and it gives an example of this concept that in other courses I mentioned many times is the difference between the Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. So what does that mean? Sherlock Holmes is this amazing detective, and he sees things that are not so obvious. And the not so obvious conclusion suddenly becomes to him the most obvious conclusion, and it turns out to be right. Dr. Watson, who is an intelligent person with experience in life, doesn't see those things, right? And the classic line is, elementary Watson, meaning it was obvious. What was not obvious was obvious, right? And so the same thing applies to any specialist, right? Any intellectual person, and the case with the mujtahid, the scholar. So when we read the Quran and Hadith, we see certain things as obvious, but they're not necessarily obvious, and they're not necessarily correct at all. So here I'm reading this verse, and it says, when you contract a loan, and it has the word dain in it, loan, إذا تداينتم, right? It has the word dain in it, loan, and it says for a fixed period of time, commit it to writing. And you come along and tell me it's actually haram to contract a loan for a fixed period of time. I'm like, are you sane? It says when you contract a loan for a fixed period of time. How could it be haram? That doesn't make any sense. And I come along and I say, actually, majority of scholars say this verse is not talking about a loan. Well, why? Right? Because it's talking about something else, talking about a forward sale. So what is a forward sale? Forward sale is I pay upfront for cement to be delivered in 3 months. So you owe me, there is a loan in that you owe me, right? So I have paid and you owe this to be delivered at a particular time taking place, right? So in reality, this is not a loan, this is a sale, it's a forward sale. It's called salam, right? And so Ibn Abbas, he mentioned that. He said this verse is talking about salam, it's not talking about a loan. As for a loan, the majority of scholars, they say a loan is like a soft contract, right? A loan is like charity. And it is not something that is tied to time. So if I lend you £10 and I say, here's £10, I don't have to mention when it's going to be paid back because I can demand it back whenever I want. And even if I stipulated a time, that still wouldn't be binding. So if I said to you, hey, I'm going to lend you £10, but I need it back within a week, I can demand it before a week. It's not a problem. That's the position of the majority of scholars. And the argument of the Malikis that you say no, that is binding, is a totally different thing, which is to do with promises, right? So in the Maliki school, financial promises, not promises, but financial promises are binding, right? That's something unique to the Maliki school. Majority of scholars that financial promises are not contracts at all. You can't say, I promise to buy something from you tomorrow. I promise to sell you something. It doesn't mean anything. It's not a contract, right? And so they see it from that point of view is that you've made a promise not to request it back before that time, and you have to keep to that, right? That's something totally different. So the majority of scholars they say this is a forward sale. So when you make a forward sale, which results in a debt because they owe you the merchandise to be delivered in a certain time, then commit it to writing. And there is also a loan in that it is not a specific thing. So you cannot sell something specific in the future, right? What does that mean, can't sell something specific in the future? Meaning the laptop in front of me right now, the mouse that I have in my hand. So I'm going to sell this to you, this mouse, this used low G mouse sell it to you in 3 months. You can't do that. I can sell you a used low G mouse of this specification. So it is generic. That's what we do in a Selim contract. You sell something that is generic, right? Socks of these color and specification and make, etc., but not this sock, right? So it is a loan, right? Yes, butu fi dhimma, right? It's now in your responsibility to pay for it. So 10 tons of cement of this quality or this specifications, etc. That's a loan, as opposed to what's called an ayn, which is a specific thing, right? Like I took your car and I need to give your car back to you, not a car like it, like it's the actual car, right? So that's not a loan. That's something else. That's a borrowing. That's a totally different thing. And it says, if the debtor is incompetent, weak, or unable to dictate, let the guardian dictate for them. So there's another concept, right, which is the freezing of assets. So in Islamic in finance, assets could be frozen for a number of reasons. For um, bankruptcy, your assets could be frozen for bankruptcy. Your assets could be frozen um, for because you're a spendthrift. Your assets can be frozen because you're insane, right? Or that you've not reached puberty yet, right? And here they debate, the scholars they debate, right? So according to Imam Shafi'i, he's very, very strict. Imam Shafi'i says for you to be a valid financial transactor, meaning you go into the world and you buy and sell things, you have to meet two conditions. Number one, you have to reach puberty. So you cannot buy and sell if you're a child. In the Shafi school, it is haram and invalid to buy and sell as a child. You can't go into a shop and buy, you know, some bread as a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old. You can't do that unless you reach puberty. Why? Because tomorrow you're going to end up in court, and then you're going to swear. I swear by Allah, this happened, this didn't happen. Well, I haven't reached puberty, and so your oath means nothing to you because you're not going to be sinful. There's no sin. And the verse of the Quran says, and test the competence of orphans until they reach a marriageable age, i.e., puberty. Then, if you find them capable of sound judgment. So Imam Shafi'i says, if you look at the word, it doesn't say capable of sound judgment. Imam Shafi'i, it says rushdan. Right? This is the Hanbali school as well. They said they are rushed, they have salah, they're righteous. So for Imam Shafi'i, you have to have reached puberty and proven to be righteous. So you're the son of a trillionaire, and all you want to do is buy drugs. All you want to do is spend money in a haram way. Your assets are frozen until you've reached puberty and proven that you're praying, you're fasting, you're doing basic things, right? And so if you don't do that, if you don't reach puberty and demonstrate demonstrate righteousness, then your assets are frozen indefinitely. Right? Now, it is not the case to say that once you start sinning, it's frozen. But the point is you have to do that. So you have to have shown that you are righteousness at some point in order for the default setting, which is your assets being frozen to be unfrozen. It's very strict. For the Hanafis, it's much easier. They say competence is the criterion. Even if you haven't reached puberty, competence, meaning you are buying a house. Does a 5-year-old have the mental and academic wherewithal to buy a house? No. Therefore, it's invalid. Does a 10-year-old have the mental and academic wherewithal to buy bread at a normal shop? Yes. So therefore, it's valid. Right? So it's much more practical, etc. And many of the Shafis adopted this position as well. Okay, and this says, call upon 2 of your men to witness. And so the default then in all financial transactions, you need 2 men. Right? All financial transactions, you need 2 men. What does it mean you need? Meaning to prove it in court. If you're not going to prove it in court, that's fine. You don't need anything. You do not have to have a witness. You don't have to have a receipt. You don't have to write anything down. It's fine. You can do multi-trillion-dollar transactions without a single witness or writing anything down is totally fine. It's totally halal and valid, right? And it's a fringe opinion that you're obliged to have witnesses. That's a fringe opinion. But the majority, vast majority of scholars, is sunnah to have witnesses, not obligatory at all. But now you want to prove something in court. You're making a claim. Where is the witness? Where are the 2 male upright pubescent men or men who saw this? They saw or heard this contract happen. You don't have anything. Okay, so therefore you don't have any evidence. So if 2 men cannot be found, then 1 man and 2 women. Right? So if one of them forgets, the other may remind. Right? And so this is the concept. The Shafi'is, they limit it to this. The Shafi'is, they say the only place where women can be witnesses instead of men are financial transactions, because that's established here. So, right. And when you say 1 man or 2 women, that means 1 man or 2 women. It does not mean 4 women. Right? You couldn't have 4 women standing in the set. You couldn't do that. You have to have 1 man and another man, or 1 man and another 2 women. Right? Now, Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, he's of the Shafis, he took this, he says, what is the utility, what is the use of a woman being as a witness? Can she change the decision of the court? The answer is yes, right? She could, because she's there and she said, so he said it, she said it, and she said it. There was man and two women, right? So Imam Jarir al-Tabari, he says, if she could change, right, the direction of the court decision here, then she can also change the issue the direction of the court decision in her capacity as a judge. So Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, he says, yeah, she can be a judge, it's fine. A female, you could have a female judge based on this concept, right? So in anything that a woman could be a witness, she can also be a judge. Vast majority of scholars say you can't do that, right? You can't have a female judge. Um, but he says, yeah, I mean, if she can be a witness, then why can't she be a judge? What's the difference, right? Being a mufti, of course she can be a mufti. Can she be a hadith narrator? Of course she can be a hadith narrator. Could she be a mufti? Could you have a female mufti? Totally fine. But a judge, no, it has to be male, according to the majority of scholars, right? Um, so if one of the women forgets, the other may remind her. However, if the contact is immediate transaction, so this is a key concept in Islamic finance, the on-spot transaction, right? An on spot is harder, it's in front of you. So Imam Shafi from this, he takes this concept of seeing things, right? So he has these two sides of things. There's dhimma and ayn. There's the book in your hand and a print of it that you can get from Amazon. One is a tangible thing. It's called hadira. It's immediate. It's there in front of you. It's present. Seen. So the word in Arabic, specific and seen are the same word. It's called ayn, right? So either the thing that you can see in front of you that's there in your hands, or it is absent and it is in you owe it to somebody and is there therefore merely a generic thing as opposed to a specific thing. So Imam Shafi'i then he adds to these things based also on various other things as well. He says these things it has to be so when it's something immediate like this phone in front of me, this pencil in front of me, then it has to be there has to be deliverable. You could it's in your hand. I could actually give it to you, and it has to be seen. So in principle, I have to look through every single page of a book because I have to see what this thing is. I have to look at every single room of the house. I have to look at every single, angle of something. I have to see it, right? But this is all, a concept that's not so clear in the Quran, but it comes in Hadith. Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam an bay'il gharar, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade vague things in contracts. You can't have vague things, right? So it's part and parcel of that thing. But the language used, hadir, that is there, it's present, it's visible, it's tangible, right? These kind of concepts, as opposed to something that you owe to somebody, right? So drop shipping, for example, I sell unique t-shirts. You click on my website. As soon as you click on my website, I order it from somebody else and ship it to your house. I don't have any t-shirts. So it's called drop shipping. So that's not something that's hard. It's not something that's in front of you. You clicked and you paid and it's now owed to you. It's now a debt. I owe you a t-shirt of this description. Doesn't have to be from this person or from that person, but it's of this specific description. So if it is hadir and not a debt, right? That's the word immediate, then there's no need to record it, etc. So these are just some key concepts there. Another thing then is selling a mushaf to a non-Muslim. So the Shafi'is, they say you cannot give any Islamic literature at all to a non-Muslim, English or otherwise. You can't do it. Right? You can't do that. Like you can't give a hadith book to a non-Muslim or a copy of the Quran in English to a non-Muslim. So therefore you can't sell any of these things to them either. Right? And the majority of scholars, they say, no, it's not like that. Right? But selling a mushaf to a non-Muslim is problematic. Right? It's problematic because it says none. We mentioned 2 weeks ago that the debate on this verse, when you say none can touch the Quran apart from the purified, do you mean the angels or do you mean believers? Right? And we said, well, it means pure believers. That was the majority vote, right? And so this person who you're going to sell the mushaf to is not a pure believer, right? And even some scholars, they said, no, a believer could touch the mushaf without wudu. It's a very, very minority opinion, because a believer is always pure, but a non-believer is not pure. Right? So they can't do that. So there's an issue there as well. Another thing then is selling on Jumu'ah. right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when the call to prayer is made on Friday, then proceed diligently to the remembrance of Allah and lead off business. So I don't listen to this summons. I don't listen to this command. And I hear the adhan, instead of walking towards the masjid, right? I'm talking about the second adhan, not the first adhan, the second adhan, which is just before the khutbah. I I don't start walking towards the prayer. I'm just going to do business instead. So here there's a debate, right? We all know that I'm sinful. Like I didn't go to Jummah. But was the sale one of many ways that I could not go to the masjid? Or did Allah prohibit the business itself? Right? Let put this another way. Has Allah forbidden me to drive a Ford Mustang full, full spec? No, he has not. Has Allah forbidden me to show off? Yes. Okay, so could it be that I could drive that car to show off? Yes. Could it be that I drive it and not wait to show off? Yes. So therefore, Allah hasn't forbidden my driving of that car or my owning of that car. Allah has only forbidden showing off, right? Has Allah forbidden me to give you give you a piece of paper? No. Has Allah forbidden me to help you do something haram? Yes. So therefore, when I gave you that piece of paper, which I knew would help you do the haram, it was just an example, one of the many ways that I could help you do the haram. But the paper itself is not something forbidden. So why is that relevant? So I say, I was on my way to Jummah. I stopped. I wanted to buy a chocolate bar. So I bought the chocolate bar. Can I eat the chocolate bar now? Given that I stopped and I was engaged in this business. So the majority of scholars, they say, yeah, it's fine. The point is, in fact, you could even do business. What if you're doing business on your phone while driving or you're just talking? So majority of scholars say the point is that you kept going towards the mosque, right? Allah has not forbidden trade itself. It's not something that's forbidden. The point is, when the trade stops you from going to Jumu'ah, which you would normally do if you're at a stall and you're selling fruit or something like that, then okay, it's a problem. Otherwise, it's just, it's not related. And then even if it did, right, the reason why I was late to Jumu'ah was because I was buying a chocolate bar. Again, it's just a coincidence. The relationship between the buying and delaying is just a coincidence. Allah has not forbidden the buying, so therefore the contract is valid. Some scholars, namely the Hanbalis, they say the contract is invalid. Like this contract is actually invalid. Like you cannot sell it this time. It doesn't count. That means it didn't happen. When you say a contract is invalid, it means it didn't happen, right? It's a bit like the issue when the Prophet ﷺ said, ولا يخطب مؤمن على مسلم على أخيه, that you can't propose to somebody who's always proposed to. So Ahmed is proposed to Fatima. Khalid finds out and he proposes to Fatima. Fatima marries Khalid instead of Ahmed. Haram. Okay, is the marriage contract? Yeah, the marriage is valid. The marriage is valid, right? So what's the difference? The Hanbalis, they say what? One is the haqq of the slaves of Allah, and one of the haqq of Allah, the rights of Allah. So here they're going to say this is actually it's a fundamentally invalid contract, as opposed to a contract that, for example, might result in harming somebody or being rude to somebody or hurting people's feelings. That's going to be sinful, but still going to be valid. Right? Okay, so there are many other verses that we could talk about, and there's many hadith as well. And again, you can listen to my playlist. I have a playlist on halal money, etc. And I talk about many of these things in more detail. We're talking about, financing houses and various different kind of things, etc., investments, etc. But one concept that we need to understand is the concept of duress, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a doable religion, right? Um, Many of my students, um, they're familiar with my favorite film, right? That I watched like three times back to back when it came out, which was The Matrix, right? I was 12 when it came out. And there's this epic scene in The Matrix where Neo is being shown these, not the matrix itself. He doesn't go into the matrix itself, but go seeing basic these programs, right? That you go into, whatever they're called. And he's being shown he's can like download skills. So he's like, oh, I know kung fu, which is great. So suddenly he's gone through. He's like a so he's doing kung fu fighting with Morpheus, and Morpheus is teaching him certain things about the matrix itself. And he says, this whole through this fight, he said there are some rules that break and there's some rules that bend, right? There's some rules that break and some rules that bend. And by default, there is this flexibility in the religion, right? There's this flexibility in religion that when you're put between a rock and a hard place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful and kind and doesn't expect you to die, doesn't expect you to lose your family, doesn't expect you to be vulnerable to rape and sexual abuse, doesn't expect you to go insane, right? Doesn't expect you to lose your religion, right? So there's such thing as called ad-darura, right? Ad-darura tubih al-mahdhurat. That duress um, shall allow the sinful. So I'm in a situation where I need to do a financial transaction which is haram. Can I do it? So no, you can't do it. It's haram. Yeah, but I would die if I don't do it. Oh, okay, sure, you can do that, right? There is no rent is banned in my country. You cannot rent. You can only rent for the first week. You come in and they give you accommodation for a week, and after that you have to buy. You're not allowed to buy. You're not allowed to. So the only way you can buy, you can live in any place in this country, right, is through an interest loan, and you're not allowed to leave the country either. That's just how it is. You're not allowed to leave the country, and you're not allowed to rent. Okay, what am I going to do then? I don't have a choice, do I? Right. So necessity, neither driven by desire nor exceeding the immediate need. Right. So there's an issue of darura, life or death scenarios. Right. I need to do an operation tomorrow morning. My son has to do it. I do not have the cash. They are not, the doctor will not accept me to pay in installments. There's no way, nobody will lend me the money. The only one I can do is go to a loan shark and he's going to lend me this $10,000 and that's it. That's the only way I can get this operation done. There's no other way. Okay. This one now, right? So necessity. But it says neither driven by desire nor exceeding the immediate need. So principle number one, ad-daruratu tubih al-mahdhurat, right? Duress shall make the haram halal. Okay. Principle number two, you can't go beyond the limits. So what is this useful in? When you look at certain contracts, for example, like conventional insurance, right? Conventional insurance by default is haram, right? It's not a clear Sharia contract. You by default you can't do things like that. There's ways of doing it in Islamic ways to careful. There's all sorts of creative ways you can do things in this totally Islamic way and can be much more creative and you can get life insurance and all sorts of things. But conventional insurance as is, by default, is haram. Okay, but I'm compelled by necessity. I can't drive my car if they will force me to do this. I'm a house owner, and if somebody, I can be sued very easily, very, very easy for the smallest little possible thing, and end up paying ridiculous amount of money, right? So I'm compelled or nigh compelled, which is a difference, nigh compelled to have medical insurance, for example, in North America, or to have house owners insurance in certain places, to have renters insurance in certain places, etc. Right? But it has to be to the minimum. So when you are forced, like literally, if I didn't do this, it would be very, 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 very bad, and it'd be very, very, very bad, very, very quickly. Fine, but that doesn't mean I can now just do whatever I want, right? Similarly, certain modern scholars, they'll say having a credit card when you know you're not going to have to pay interest on it. So the fact that you agreed, you cooperated in sin, right? At least you began cooperating in sin. You agreed with the credit card company that I will borrow this money and then I will pay you back in interest. Um, so pay you back in interest. So the contract is sinful, even if you don't actually pay any interest. But certain scholars they say, A, if you know you're gonna pay it back in time, and B, where you live in a developed country where having a credit card is a nigh necessity, meaning there's lots of things you couldn't do, right, without a credit card. And it'd be very, very hard. They say this is nigh necessity, and you're not actually getting involved in interest. You're just agreeing to potentially pay interest. So they think this is permissible, not in the scenario where you're actually getting involved in interest or that you didn't need it. For example, you're in a country where you don't need the credit card is extra and it's not important, right? But in certain places where let's say, for example, a business, a business credit card, you're making huge purchases, and using a debit card would be very, very difficult and cause all sorts of, logistic problems. And it's widespread difficulty. Certain scholars, they hold that's permissible. But again, on those criteria that there is a great need, right? And B, you're not actually getting involved in interest, right? So actually getting involved in interest would be when you are compelled, right? And so many people, they say, for example, there's a fatwa is out there that, you can get a loan for a house because, in general, people kind of need to have, you can't just rent your whole life, can you? The answer is you can. I mean, you can do that. It's just very difficult, but you can do that. Like, so that's not actually a duress, right? So like 99% vote of scholars today is like, no. And a lot of these things that, there was a whole discussion, there was a kind of a world conference on this issue about the West. They said in the West, where there is no Islamic finance, Muslims, they should have this thing. And then actually they realized, they took the vote back. So what happens is we often hear information in an inaccurate way. There's a fatwa given, and that fatwa is retracted, and we just given the original one. And so it's important to understand that yes, you can get involved in haram if you're forced, but if you're not actually forced, you can't do that. So inshallah, we'll stop there. And inshallah, I'll share the inshallah playlist about halal haram money making inshallah on the group. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك